Bekenstein is not available today. Just a quick recap. Yesterday, you would have had a discussion, about the priorities of the G20 South Africa 2025. You would have had an overview of T20 South Africa 2025, what we're trying to achieve. We had a discussion, on a whole range of issues associated with that, the nature of multilateralism today, the issues facing developing economies. We discussed digital technologies. We discussed incomes and so on. We are going to take it a step further today and look at a few other thematic issues concerning the realities of developing economies today. We're going to be discussing finance, develop the goals of development finance and the global financial architecture reforms. We've got an esteemed panel of speakers that are going to help us discuss these issues, unpack a bit from the side of the G20 and of course the side of the T20 task force on this. With me, I've got or with us, rather, we've got Sarah McPhail from the South African Reserve Bank. We've got who's going to take us through the G20 goals, essay goals on development finance and the global financial architecture reforms. And we've got a panel of co-chairs of the task force on financing for sustainable development. Of course, colleagues will recall finance for sustainable development is a core priority for the South African G20 presidency, and the T20 process is responding to that priority. If colleagues are ready, I will call upon Ms. McPhail to take to the mic and present what you'd like to share with us. Ms. McPhail.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone. I don't have any slides because I was a last minute presenter for this session, but glad to be here. As many of you know, National Treasury is very busy with the budget. So they unfortunately couldn't attend. And I am a lead policy analyst at the South African Reserve Bank, co-leading particularly the Sustainable Finance Working Group in the G20. So today, I'm just going to speak about our meetings that we held last week in Cape Town. It was quite an intense 4 days, and I came back from Cape Town to Pretoria with a bit of a cold, so you'll bear with me if my voice is a bit croaky or if I need to drink some water as we go through it. I mean, overall, from an operational side, we got really good feedback for how well the deputies and the governors and ministers of finance event went last week at the CTICC. We had very high-level representation. The US Governor, Jerome Powell, was there. There were some senior-level US Treasury representatives, and generally a lot of governors and ministers of finance were in attendance. Because South Africa hosts the presidency, we obviously sit in the front, but we sit together with Brazil and the USA, who the three countries form the Troika, Brazil being last year's presidency and USA being next year's presidency. So the finance track really deals with the strategic macroeconomic issues, and it's led by members, countries, finance ministers, and central bank heads. There are 7 technical groups in the finance track, as well as 3 task forces. The Reserve Bank leads, so the Reserve Bank and the Treasury are in charge of the finance track, and the Reserve Bank leads the coordination specifically in the Sustainable Finance Working Group, the Framework Working Group, as well as the financial sector issues, which isn't really a working group, but more discussions. And then we also lead and coordinate with Treasury certain priorities under the remaining groups, the International Financial Architecture, the Working Group for Tax, for infrastructure, as well as for financial inclusion. And obviously, these are aligned with the respective mandates of Treasury and the SARB. So the meetings last week were opened by the president, who spoke about, at a high level, the 4 key priorities for the G20 finance track. The first one, to strengthen disaster resilience and response. The second one, to ensure debt sustainability for developing economies. He also made mention of meeting last week with 7 former African heads of state who have started the African Leaders Debt Relief Initiative. He spoke about the third priority, to mobilize finance for a just energy transition, and the fourth priority, to harness critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. So the Sustainable Finance Working Group in particular aims to mobilize primarily private financing for sustainable finance for global growth and stability, and to promote the transition to a greener, resilient, inclusive society and economies. The group does this by identifying institutional and market barriers to sustainable finance and developing options to overcome these barriers, to contribute to better alignment of the international financial system to the objectives of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as the Paris Agreement. So for 2025, there are 3 priorities under the Sustainable Finance Working Group. The first one includes strengthening global sustainable financial architecture. The second one is scaling up finance for adaptation and just transitions. And the third priority is unlocking the financing potential of carbon markets. And this is looking to develop a data model. So under the first priority of strengthening the global sustainable finance architecture, the deliverables for these are a compendium of successful co-finance projects, including a description of the project finance, the mechanism, as well as the lessons learned, a set of recommendations on how to scale up co-financing by vertical climate and environmental funds, multilateral and national development banks, and mobilize funding from the private sector, as well as a short progress report on the implementation of last year's high-level expert group review of the VCFs, and that was delivered under the G20 Brazilian presidency. And this report will be based on information shared by the vertical climate and environmental funds and other stakeholders, and will be annexed to our annual sustainable finance report. And more details for the Sustainable Finance Working Group can be found in our note on agenda priorities, which is published on the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group website. Under International Financial Architecture, IFA, in December was the first finance and central banks deputies meeting, and that provided broad support for the 4 priorities areas: to strengthen multilateral development banks, ensuring finance for development; to enhance debt sustainability and address liquidity challenges; to strengthen global financial safety nets and reform global governance institutions; and to enhance financial resilience by strengthening capital flows to emerging markets and developing economies. So last week's meetings really then took to get further inputs from member countries on the issues notes that were delivered under these 7 different working groups. The meeting last week discussed the proposed process to develop the monitoring and reporting framework to track progress against the MDB roadmap, and incorporating the 2025 Capital Adequacy Framework Report as an annex. It also discussed policy solutions and international cooperation and facilitating a multi-pronged approach towards debt sustainability, to provide guidance on strengthening the common framework, informed other recommendations from the G20 note on lessons learned from the framework's first case studies, and to gather the views of the ministers and governors on non-bank financial institutions, how they impact on capital flows, and explore how the G20 can leverage existing work to better understand how non-bank financial institutions are affecting EMDEs. For the 4 days overall last week, 2 days was deputies and then 2 days was the ministers and governors, there was a general support for the work program of the G20. Obviously, there are geopolitical issues going on that are playing out in the media as well. But overall, there was general support that the work program can continue. As the chair statement was issued after the meeting, and the chair statement is something that has been done before in the Indonesian presidency, and this is essentially when there's not consensus on the wording for a communique. So some of the discussions last week that I thought would be interesting for the T20, I'll just touch on a few. The one was members were encouraged, the IMF and the World Bank, to continue their work related to feasible options, which are country-specific, on a voluntary basis, to help vulnerable countries with near-term liquidity challenge whose debt is sustainable. There was lots of discussions on the role of private capital and blended finance, more cooperation between different financial providers, opportunities for de-risking, and standardizing policies and terms of financing agreements to scale up funding. Numerous countries noted the growth of their non-banking financial institutions and the need for better data and regulations, and to leverage the work of the Financial Stability Board. There were a lot of inputs around the uncertainty from protectionism and these kind of policies, and the need to deepen global integration to avoid distortionary policies, and to undertake growth-enhancing structural reforms which ultimately start at a domestic level. Some members, as well as international organizations, spoke about the role of stress testing and scenarios and preparedness for financial instability, as well as improving disaster risk funding, as well as insurance coverage. There was an underlying and recurring comment for the finance track to focus on financial issues and to complement but not duplicate the work of the Sherpa track, and to take into considerations different country circumstances. And then lastly, alongside the G20 itself, there were many side events going on. There was a sustainable finance high-level panel with Mary Vilakazi, the CEO of FirstRand. There were numerous side events under the G20 expert group, which was led by former Minister Trevor Manuel. And then there was a Finance in Common Summit, fixed summit, which had over 2,000 participants, also in the ICC. So Cape Town was really full and buzzing. And the fixed summit was opened and led by the UN representative, Ms. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN and a chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. That's a high-level summary from me. Thanks.
Unmute. Thank you so much, Ms. McPhail, for this fantastic overview of exactly where we are on this conversation. This important G20 process on finance and reforms of the international financial architecture. To respond to this and take the conversation further, we have the co-chairs coming up now of Task Force 3, Ms. Hannah Ryder, Mr. Martin Kessler, and Dr. Daniel Bradlow. Of course, colleagues, just to remind you, you have a combined 15 minutes, please. So, in order to assist us to enable everyone to get a fair shake, at the conversation, in the discussion. Please, let's try to stick to just that. You will decide which way you proceed between the three of you, who goes first, and so on. But you have 15 minutes. Colleagues.
Thank you so much. And let me also quickly start, please, for Dr. Bravo, who is unable to join us this morning. However, we have obviously coordinated on what we're going to be saying. So hopefully we will reflect what he hopes for this group. I'm going to kick off very briefly with some sort of context, and I think what has already been presented from the South African presidency gives a lot of that context. I'll give something slightly different, and then Martin will go on to talk about kind of how we plan to take forward the process and the specificities of our of the Finance for Development group task force. So in terms of context, I think there's a few, just to sort of the work of T20 so far in this area, and also the G20 itself, and in particular the International Financial Architecture group and what that has achieved so far. I think there are effectively, I'm going to put them in very stark terms and very kind of easy to understand, I hope, terms. There are 5 essential challenges that we're facing right now with the international financial architecture. Number one, and perhaps most importantly, it is not large enough as it is designed, or the mechanisms are not there for it to develop, to provide sufficient development finance for those who need it. We still have so many financing gaps, especially on the African continent, to be able to that need filling, and this is one key issue. The second is that it is not cheap enough. The finance that is available is very expensive compared to the return that much of what is required for development will deliver in a short term. And that also is a major problem. Third, it doesn't leverage enough. And we heard a lot of emphasis just now on private sector. But of course, if there's not enough public finance, if it's expensive, there's no serious surprises that it doesn't leverage the private sector enough. So that's also a challenge. There's an ambition for private sector, lovely ambition for private sector, but definitely doesn't come through. Fourth, it is not sustainable enough in the environmental context, and especially with regards to climate action. A lot of finance is obviously continuing to go to fossil fuel, and there's a balance there, and renewable remains, even though prices have come down, renewables do remain very expensive in comparison to fossil fuels in some places. And then last but not least, the international financial architecture is not responsive enough to crisis. And we've seen that even in the HIPC period, it took a very long time for the financial architecture to respond. It took countries like Somalia 23 years to actually agree debt reform positions. So that is an indication of just how difficult it is. So if we have, with that context, we've seen significant work by the International Financial Architecture Group on, in particular, on the fourth issue in terms of sustainability and climate action, especially in terms of encouraging multilateral development banks to reform, to find new ways to incentivize relatively support of renewable energy, for example. But of course, there's still some gaps, and the overall constraint remains on the number one, not large enough climate finance or development finance. The International Financial Architecture Group has also done a lot of work on the fifth one in terms of responsiveness to crisis. And in particular, the common framework, which was again referred to, and that, you know, the group itself has been doing its own homework in terms of marking its own homework in terms of how good the common framework has been as an evolution of both bilateral deals and Paris Club work. The question is, again, you know, whether there is there's obviously with the formation of the group of African former presidents around debt, increasing calls for debt relief, of a much wider scale than those countries that have gone into the common framework. The recognition of the problems of the common framework from outside of the G20 in particular are being recognized, and obviously need show that there's much more work to do in this area. So I think that suggests that this T20 task force on finance for development remains very crucial. There's a lot, I think, in particular, I think there's two key areas that we would be hoping for as many of the abstracts and papers that come out of the T20 and the communique itself in this area to, even at this stage, without preempting all of it, but really sort of have an overall sense of two things. Number one is a sense of urgency, because we have had this international financial architecture for 80 years, and it is obviously not working, and time is running out for many people. So it already ran out for so many people, millions of people. So we really need a sense of urgency. Second of all, I think we'll be looking for, from the abstracts and policy papers, creativity to think outside of the box of the existing financial architecture, because when we do just build on what has gone before, it has so far been fairly disappointing. Even if it's done a bit, it's still been quite disappointing compared to what the expectations and aspirations of the vast majority of the countries in the world are. So I think that will be where we hope the overall sort of thrust can be from this working group and this task force. And I'll hand over now to Martin to take us forward, to let us all know how we will try to achieve that. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Hannah, and thanks a lot to the T20, the South African presidency. I was in Cape Town last week for the Fixed Finance Common Summit, and indeed hosting, both in terms of logistics, but also in terms of content, and the ambition was really visible throughout the summit, through the interaction that were between the G20 that was going on and the broader community of development institutions, development banks, and civil society organizations that were present. And so thanks a lot for the hospitality, and also I think for the impetus that I think the presidency is giving towards those questions that our task force on international finance and development finance is covering. And I think we could see, maybe I'd say a word about the process and where we are in terms of the task force. So there are 27 experts as co-leads, with co-chairs is Anna Ryder, Daniel Bradlow, who is a South African representative, but couldn't be here today, and myself, based in Paris, and we are with 27 colleagues from about 20 countries. We received almost 80 submissions, so a lot of ambition towards those topics, and especially, and I think it's fitting the priorities of the presidency. A lot were about debt and development, and so I think we really want to make this task force useful to the presidency, that the proposals that are there can feed into the more political conversation that happen between finance ministers, central bank governors, the Sherpas, the leaders. We hope that the ideas that we get are technical ideas that can help feed into the political processes, and that can offer solutions to the important question that the policymakers are facing. That's and I think with the different initiative mentioned by the representative of the central bank of the South African Reserve Bank, the African leaders, that initiative, the reflection, the commission of the experts group on the cost of capital. I think those are absolutely key issues. And in the abstract, in the proposal that we've seen a lot of that reflected, and we hope that those can feed into those discussions. It's also and as part of the task force, there's also a lot of conversations on the tax system and how international taxes can help support developing countries at a time where development assistance is shrinking. And so in terms of the process, so we advance, I think, our goal from the co-chair's point of view is to so first select a group of policy brief that will fit into it, and then generate conversations. We hope to have at the different moment of the G20, for example, starting with the spring meetings in April, to foster those discussions. We are trying to organize an event in the margin of spring meetings with our colleagues from the TF4 focused on climate, and at each moment we'll try to animate the conversation, to use the experts from all over the world on these topics to improve the technical aspect of the conversation. I'll end here. I don't know, Anna, if I'm missing anything, but no. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Very clear. The message to policy brief authors is very clear. There's a lot of urgency to arrive at the solution, for the many challenges that we face. A need for high impact, recommendations to be made and to be followed up on. Thank you so much, colleagues. You actually managed to put through a presentation within the 15 minutes, actually 3 minutes short, of your allocated time. Congratulations to you. So we'll go on to a discussion now to hear out, what colleagues in the audience are saying, what it is that they have in mind that they need responses to. I see there were 2 questions from the audience, now down to 1. Can we see, colleagues, if there are any hands that would like to ask pose questions to our panelists? I'm not seeing any so far. Oh, there's one. Okay, what I'll do is, as I see them, I will call the name up, and you will unmute and pose your question. And please be very brief, no longer than 30 seconds, for your questions, colleagues. It's very important. Thank you so much, Ziva Kuma Venta Karataram.
Thank you. My name is too long, but you can call me Siva.
Okay.
So my question is same as yesterday. I posted the same question. How we are going to deal with the BRICS economy, because we've been informed that we're going to follow a unique currency for the trading, and that could bring up or bring down the whole inflations what we are facing in the country. Thank you.
Okay, there's a BRICS angle there. Thank you so much for your question, Siva. Then we've got Dr. Gillian Marcel.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that fantastic panel. I want to go directly to the comments made by Hannah Ryder, her third point in terms of the need to leverage private financing. And I'm asking both for your suggestions and also happy to make a follow-up comment on what I think is needed, especially because she invited us to be creative. So my question is, what is being done to leverage private financing? And then I'm happy to make a suggestion on what I think we should be doing as a community to make sure that at the end of the year, we are not simply reporting that as a continuing gap. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Marcel. I don't see any other raised hands, so I will defer to questions in the Q&A. The one is also from, again, Dr. Marcel. How do you propose, to panelists, how do you propose to activate interests from private sector? One, there's another from Yagene Foru Heshfa. What is the expected timeline for the acceptance of the policy briefs? I think colleagues will respond to that in the Q&A. I see a hand, Dr. I see Zamiat. Good to see you again, Zamiat. Please go ahead. Zamiat Abubakar.
My hand is not up. Sorry.
Oh,
Mika, it's Dr. Renee.
oh, Dr. Renee. Oh, apologies, Dr. Renee.
Yes.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I have just one question. It is that do you think necessary financial institution to change paradigm like duplication for realization of infrastructure in Africa? Do you have the mechanism ready for that in African countries? Thank you so much.
Did you hear that? I didn't hear that very clearly. Please repeat that, Dr. Diouf. Dr. Diouf?
That's okay. You hear me?
No, now I can hear you. Please repeat your question again.
Yes, my question is, do you think in Africa necessary financial institution can change paradigm like duplication for realization of infrastructure that the countries need? I don't know if it is clear.
Okay.
Yes.
They will respond. Thank you so much, Doctor, for that. Let's see if there are any other hands. Oh, yes, we've got Chantal Naidu.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Chantal, are you? I might have chimed in on Chantal's sign in. So yes. So my name's actually. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So sorry for joining on someone else's name. I'm sure Chantal's also on. My name is Penny Herbst. I'm from Rabia Transitions. And thank you to the panelists for the high-level summary. And I'm saying thank you for the high-level summary. I think for me, I'm normally one that's always focusing on the devil is in the detail. And I'd really like to understand what this group is going to do to drill down into some of the substance. And at the end of the day, not have a kind of this high-level feedback again about, this is where we stand, but it's still all very high level. And I think my main concern here is that a lot of the finance that needs to be raised is obviously for public purpose goods. And when we're talking about investments in public purpose goods and leveraging private sector finance, unfortunately, to a large extent, we left with the likes of private equity, private debt, private XYZ that aren't regulated and really are calling the shots. And this situation has come about as a result of governments allowing this to happen. So how are we going to take ownership back from private debt? It's all very well talking about leveraging a private debt, but everything I've seen about private debt says you take our terms or you leave it. So where is the money going to come from? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Let's see. Okay, no more hands. I don't know if I've attended to all of the questions in the Q&A. There's another two colleagues, if you'll bear with me. I hope you're taking note of all of these questions. There's a great interest in this conversation. Are there any specific work streams foreseen on financing and investments in new technologies, especially artificial intelligence projects in Africa, given their transformative potential across all sectors? And another one, It says, how do you see prospects for a meaningful scale-up of sustainable development finance at a time of increasing politicization of both concessional and non-concessional financial flows? Can a web of bigger and better national and regional development banks be a way to bypass geopolitical tension? Let's see. There are so many more questions. There's something in the web chat. I think what we can do, other colleagues that were on the panel yesterday and some that within the task forces, they can feel free as well to respond to some of the questions in the webinar chat. I think that would be quite useful. Maybe if I could take one last hand from Azwi Mpeleli Langa from the floor, please go ahead. Azwi Mpeleli.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
All right, thanks. Good morning. Sorry, I joined a bit midstream, so my question might be misplaced. But I wanted to ask if there is a task force or a group that is working on critical minerals, because I know this is part of the South African government thematic areas.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, the issue of critical minerals is covered within the 5 task forces that we've set up for T20 SA. Colleagues, if are you okay to respond to the questions so far, perhaps before we go for a second round of questions? Ms. Ryder, Mr. Kessler.
Right.
Ms. McPhail.
I'll start. I can start with a couple and then go to Hannah, and maybe just preface by saying that those are very broad questions and very important questions. I don't have the answer very clearly. And I think the role of our group is to have a deliberative across different perspectives, different countries, to try to come up with answers on those. So in a way, this is a method, and I think this discussion more, on how we'll come to possible answer in the current context on those different questions. Maybe let me take the one on I mean, it's 2 questions on how to leverage the private sector, and is it really a good idea to finance what is essentially public goods? And I think that the reality is that whether it's multilateral or public in national financing is limited, and that there are ways to find areas where you can, with the right support, and I think it's very important to make sure that this is not subsidy to the private sector, but where the private sector actually has takes the risks that it needs, and invests in some part of infrastructure. So I think that there is a role, but I agree that we have to be extremely careful on avoiding simple subsidies and end up with risks that are purely on the public sector or on the final user, on the consumer of an infrastructure, and that some functions need to be financed with public. So some things cannot be financed with private financing. So this is in doing that we can generate ideas on tools on contracts that can manage to mobilize private financing without shifting all the risks to the public sector. I think there was a question on whether how to leverage or how to use the regional financial institutions in Africa, whether the institutions were right, and I think that's an area where we need a lot more work. There's been important advances recently. The African Union adopted the principle of African financing stability mechanism, which will help in avoiding very large shocks on financial markets. But Africa is for now the only region without a regional financial safety net, and so we need to make progress on that. And the G20 has a role to help advancing that process. I'll stop there. Let's then complete my answers to the question.
Anna?
Yeah, I probably don't have too much to add, but I think first of all, this is T20 in terms of the role of business. That is obviously being facilitated by G20 overall through the B20, and I think they will obviously have plenty of thoughts on this track, and in particular on questions around leveraging. But I think where we can really add value is, as mentioned, the sort of creativity, but also the evidence. Thinking about cost of the kinds of challenges that the private sector faces in terms of being able to leverage. Some of that is driven at the international level and can be addressed at the international level. There was mention of regulation, and that's one possibility. And these are the sorts of decisions that the G20 can take, right? The G20 can make decisions around regulation, international regulation. So, I mean, that's why this is such an important grouping. Where there's a will, there's a way. But as we know, if costs are high at an international level for development finance, that will feed into, at every stage, the costs increasing when you get to the level of just an ordinary person. And so those are some of the issues. That's why, for example, unless you deal with some of the issues at the international level and international constraints, you might do whatever you can with regional and domestic banks, but you're obviously going to be constrained by the overall system. So that's why this financial architecture group is so important, why it's so important to feed into it through the T20 track and through this track. And last but not least, I think, again, there was mention on financial intervention and intermediation. There was talk about currency shifts and so on. I think many of these, I think we have to realize are, again, creative ways of trying to solve a lot of problems that have been there, and different groups are trying to think about them. And again, as T20, what we can do is look at, the evidence of where those problems are stemming from, what are the currency challenges, for instance, that countries are facing, what are the different scenarios for different currency options or baskets, or even different reliability on different internationalization of different currencies, where currencies might even merge, these sorts of things, and then kind of look at those as creative options. And that's exactly like what the role of T20 can be, and to be able to propose those sorts of solutions if they are going to be if they are good solutions, if that's something that the T20 agrees on. So yeah. Thanks very much for all of the different suggestions, and we do encourage people to continue to review the briefs that come out.
Okay. Thank you so much, colleagues, for that. We do still have just under 6.5 minutes for this discussion. Ms. McPhail, if you're still there, if you would like to respond to some of the questions.
Thanks. I did respond to some in the chat with the information that I could, but I think the other questions are mostly focused on T20, not on G20 per se.
Okay. There's one last hand up. If perhaps we can respond to this one last question. The two actually. Shavi Chaudhry. Shavi?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please, very quickly, we've got 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, sir, for this opportunity. My question is basically regarding with the exit of US aid, how can South Africa as a G20 president, champion Africa's financial autonomy by enhancing domestic resource mobilization and promoting regional development banks and securing more equitable access. So, what steps are taken by the task force in this regard?
Thank you so much. That will be the last hand that we're taking. Colleagues, you are free to take the mic to respond to that. Ms. McPhail, do you want to go at it first? Or Martin?
No, that was for T20. I mean, I think not USAID exit specifically, but I think around domestic resource mobilization and promoting regional development banks, that is part of the priorities under both the Sustainable Finance Working Group and the International Financial Architecture Working Group.
Fantastic stuff. Hannah, do you want to give it a go as well?
I mean, I think the International Financial Architecture Working Group and what we do in the T20 needs to take into account those shifts. I think domestic resource mobilization has been a major agenda for a very long time. There are, of course, mathematical constraints to domestic resource mobilization. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be just because there's been some pulling back doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to work on the international financial architecture. In many ways, it makes it more crucial. And again, this is where we'll be looking for creative solutions from those out there. We already see a lot of ideas being circulated, things like global public investment and so on. Financial transactions taxes, etc. These are the sorts of things that the T20 can look at, can propose, which may avoid these sorts of situations in future, while at the same time continuing the incredible work so many governments are doing on domestic resource mobilization. We have to remember they're really working so hard on it. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, colleagues. We've got just under 3 minutes left. We'll proceed to the next one, but just before we do, there was a question in the Q&A about the cost of capital commission. I don't know if colleagues want to go at that quickly, if you'd like. And one from me, just food for thought. The role and impact of finance and the solutions that we propose on finance on raising or impacting on inequalities. The fate of and the realities of women and young people. Just to keep in the back of our minds, what is it that needs to be done to mitigate, to assist, to be sensitive to, and so on. Quickly, 1 minute 49 seconds left. Anna?
Okay, I'll give a really quick answer. And I also realize there's a couple of things also not meant that another couple of questions that were asked. So just in terms of things like guarantee institutions, I think these are, again, really creative ideas. Please, T20 authors, please do put these ideas forward. There might be space for the papers are exactly the place to explore whether a regional guarantee institution could help bridge financing gaps. Like, this is exactly the point. There's a question around specific funds. I think in our group, we will not be looking at specific funds. There are other groups which will, but I think our question is like, to what degree specific funds for, blue finance or climate finance or, public infrastructure, digital infrastructure, etc., are useful in bringing together an international financial architecture that works, or how can the international financial architecture bolster those sorts of things. So it's the interoperability of those different funds, which I think our group will be concerned with, as opposed to whether those funds should exist or not, etc. But we won't be looking at them specifically. And then in terms of what you were mentioning of the key issues such as the sustainability of the finance in terms of who it's going to and targeting. Again,
Anna, we've got just a few seconds left. If you could perhaps continue to answer in the the Q&As and the chat, and we give Martin the last 20 seconds to respond
Yep, and now just a point of process. I think the question on critical minerals on digital public infrastructure make me think that as we'll do at the spring meetings with the climate group, I think we can also try to use this, as experts, we tend to be narrow and to be in our lane, but use this group and these task forces to talk with, experts in different in different sectors and see how financing can contribute to public infrastructure, critical minerals, and how those different sectors can talk to each other. So that's something I think I'll see from your session, from your questions, that we can try to do.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you so very much for this, colleagues. It's been really spectacular a session on finance and the global financial architecture and so on. There's still an opportunity for the co-chairs to continue responding to questions in the chat and in the question and answer icon. And to respond to some questions, including one on reparations, by the way, and so on. Thank you so much for this. We move on to our next panel, one that deals with the forces of inclusive forces. Task Force, G20 Task Force, Inclusive Economic Growth, Industrialization, Employment, and Reducing Inequality. I understand that there's a slight change of a program. Ambassador Dave Malcolmson has said an 11th hour call, so he can no longer join us. So we'll go directly to Mr. Masocha Mnguni. If Mr. Masocha is ready, Mr. Masocha can then proceed, please. Mr. Masocha Mnguni.
Thank you, program facilitator. I hope I'm audible.
You are, okay, yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm trying to open the video here so that I can everybody can see me, but I don't want to waste time. I think when the video is decided that it wants to open, it will do so. Thank you, facilitator and colleagues, for giving us the opportunity to brief you on the task forces. As has been said, my colleague, Ambassador Dave Malcolmson, who is the Sherpa Track coordinator for Task Force 1. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he can no longer be here to present on the task force. So I will be doing both Task Force 1, 2, and possibly 3. Because in addition to the 4 strategic priorities of South Africa's G20 presidency, which are strengthening disaster resilience and response, 2, taking action to ensure debt sustainability for low-income countries, 3, mobilizing finance for a just energy transition. And then lastly, as one of the participants correctly pointed out, harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. So over and above these high-level priorities, we have, as the G20 presidency, identified three task forces, which of course we will be advancing to sort of get outcomes on issues which we feel are of critical importance to the development, to the agenda of the developmental global South. So there are three task forces in total. The first one is Task Force 1 on inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reduced inequality. The second one is Task Force 2 on food security. And then the last one is on artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. And those who have been following the work of the G20, at least in the past 5 years, would realize that some of the elements contained in these task forces have, in one way or the other, been incorporated in the presidencies, the last 4 presidencies of the Global South by Indonesia, India, Brazil, and of course, South Africa. So through this work, we as South Africa aim to ensure that the work that has been done in these past few years by the Global South presidencies is consolidated and further enhanced. For example, if you look at Task Force 2 on food security, it is in one way or the other linked to Brazil's high-level deliverable on the Global Alliance against hunger and poverty, which South Africa, of course, was one of the countries that were the first to join this important global alliance. Then, when it comes to the composition of these task forces, Task Force 1 on inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reduced inequality is one of those unique task forces in that they bring together, or it brings together, both the Sherpa track and the finance track. For example, in the Sherpa track, you would have departments or working groups such as the employment working group, the development working group, trade and investment working group, energy transitions, women's empowerment working group. That is in the Sherpa track. And then in the finance track, you have the framework working group. And part of this task force includes an initiative which has been, of course, outlined as one of the key deliverables under South Africa's G20 presidency, which is the initiative on critical minerals, as has been said. And of course, the angle we are taking when it comes to critical minerals is harnessing critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. We are, of course, currently in the process of releasing the concept paper on critical minerals. Is at an advanced stage, and we hope that by sometime later next week, before Task Force 1 convenes on the 17th, this paper would have been released. But some of the key elements or deliverables under the critical minerals initiatives include increased investment in exploration, increased beneficiation at source, and of course, the issue of integrating artisanal mining into mainstream economies. So those are the elements we'll be looking at in the critical minerals initiative. If I can then go into the envisaged deliverables. For Task Force 1, one of the key deliverables which we intend to achieve is the G20 principles for inclusive economic growth, jobs, and equality. We also envisage to have a joint ministerial declaration to endorse these principles, which will then form part of the G20 leaders declaration. So what is it then that will be components of these principles? So the areas then that we would look at, firstly, is the structural reforms. This, of course, relates to policy and regulatory reforms that facilitate the entry of new and dynamic firms, that facilitate matching of workers and jobs, and that align worker skills with industry needs. This, of course, will be necessary to overcome the barriers to the creation of more and better jobs. Two, in the area of digital transformation, we are looking at technology reshaping industries through automation, digital platforms, and artificial intelligence, enhancing productivity and creating new markets. We will also, through these principles, be looking at the question of resilience, that is climate change and the green transition, its impact on industries and labor markets, and so on and so forth. Then when it comes to Task Force 2 on food security, and as I said, this is more of a continuation of what Brazil had under the Global Alliance. The task force will look at food security and systems at the regional and global levels, with a specific focus on the macroeconomic dimensions on food security and food prices. This, of course, is an important issue for not only South Africans, but the continent and the global South in general. So under this task force, then the work will build off and assess the effectiveness of previous G20 initiatives undertaken since 2011 on food and agricultural commodities price volatility. Under the regional framework, there will also be a study which will explore policy interventions that link national strategies with regional food security approaches that are climate resilient and sustainable, such as the African Union Special Envoy on Food Systems initiatives to create regional food baskets. The second study, which we are also investigating, will examine the feasibility of various commodity price stabilization techniques at regional and global levels to mitigate food price shocks, to prevent increases in hunger and poverty. Of course, the available policy approaches will be captured in a G20 policy priorities on strategies to stabilize food pricing, to achieve food security and end hunger. We, of course, had the task force meeting yesterday, where these elements were presented in greater details. The same was the case with Task Force 3 on artificial intelligence that took place last week, where the concept note was presented. So if I may, a facilitator, just share some of the elements on the Task Force 3, that is the artificial intelligence, innovation, and so on. So some of the outcomes will be the AI for Africa initiative, the technology policy assistance facility, data governance dialogue, AI for sustainable development, ethical applications, and a high-level statement on AI, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. This task force will reflect on the relevant outcomes also, since this issue is a cross-cutting matter. It will focus on the relevant outcomes emerging from across the working groups where AI and data governance is being addressed in specific contexts, including employment, the environment, education, the cultural industry, research and innovation, trade, agriculture, and so forth. This will then be incorporated into a high-level statement on AI and data governance and innovation for sustainable development. This declaration also will commit the G20 to developing and disseminating ethical, sustainable, accessible, resource-efficient, and environmentally friendly AI technologies. So in essence, Chair and colleagues, those will be the key elements that will inform the work that will go into the task forces. As I said, these are task forces that in the main incorporate both stakeholders from the Sherpa and the finance sector. And then lastly, another important issue which we need to mention, which is not necessarily covered under task forces, but is a key deliverable worth mentioning, is the review of the G20, which South Africa will pursue, which will then assess how the G20 has fared during the first cycle of G20 presidencies, and then come up with recommendations in terms of how the G20 can better do its work in the second cycle. Thank you very much, Mr. Facilitator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mnguni. You overshot your time by a few seconds there, but I thought to allow you to continue because I'm told you have very little time to spend with us. But once again, thank you so much for joining us. We have about 5 minutes for a quick discussion on your contribution. So I will be taking maybe 1 or 2 or 3 hands for your contribution. I do not see any so far. Let's see in the Q&A if there's one immediate one that I can see. How will the work by G20 task forces differ to interact with the work of G20 working groups? I think this one is more for the task forces to respond to. Food security in South Africa is also under stretch. I think that is what is the G20 approach towards the problem. That one is for you, Mr. Mnguni. What is the strategy of the G20 to reverse the tendency of big private multinational companies to shift jobs to countries of origin where their head offices are mostly developed countries, and how to encourage them to rather involve themselves in building industries in developing countries where jobs are needed most? Perhaps if you are in a position to respond, just very quickly, share your views on these 3 questions.
Okay. Excuse me, facilitator. I did not, I think, hear you clearly. Maybe there must have been a technical problem. Can you quickly repeat the questions? I got the first one on the relationship between the task forces and the working groups, but I struggled to hear the 2 and 3.
Okay, there's one on food security in South Africa is also under is under siege. What is the G20 approach towards this problem? And
Okay.
then there's another on what is the strategy of the G20 to reverse the tendency of big private multinational companies to shift jobs to the countries of origin where their head offices are, mostly developed countries, and to encourage them to rather involve themselves in building industries in developing countries where jobs are needed most.
Okay. No, thank you for those questions, colleagues. I'll start with the first questions on the relationship between the task forces and working groups, the issues of potential duplication and so on. So if then the colleagues get a chance to interact with both the issue notes and the concept notes of the task forces, though there may be similarities, but they will realize then that at a task force a level, there is the ambition in the form of these deliverables is pitched at a high level to ensure that some of these outcomes become a G20 a legacy projects, which of course will in one way or the other outlive what is being done at task force working group level. For example, in the context of the task force one, I did talk to the issue of G20 principles for inclusive economic growth, jobs, and equality. This, of course, is a deliverable which is foreseen to sort of have an impact or influence in the work in the future work of the G20 when it comes to these matters. And then number two, on food security and the relations of these questions to what is happening in South Africa. I think this is a very important question because it then addresses the issue of how the work we are doing in the G20 connects to the domestic situation. We do know that the G20, of course, is a strategic site in which the developing South, especially countries like South Africa, which is not only advancing its own national interests, but is looking at the agenda of the African continent and the global South in general. And of course, through then these deliverables I've outlined in the context of the food, the food security issues, especially as it relates to the studies I have mentioned on the relations between food security and food prices. I think the recommendation of that study, given also the influence of the platform that is the G20, the policy initiative, we will sort of leverage through this work, can help us, I think, shift the policy needle a bit in terms of how this question of food security needs to be addressed. I think The same issue relates to the question of multinationals, their location and so forth. This work is also being done mainly in the finance track, and there's no doubt that the recommendations that will be coming from the finance track on this on the issues related to that question can have an impact in terms of how the policy debate is shifted as regards issues that have been raised related to the issue of multinationals. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mnguni. We've got 50 seconds left, and there's only one hand up, Erin Lorima. If you could, maybe respond to a question quickly, Erin.
Thank you very much. I had two questions I'll wrap in. One is around, yes, the 20-year review, whether the topics of that have been selected yet. There's a lot of history around fossil fuel subsidy review that would be interesting to look at, and then further whether there are plans to have a consultation with your engagement groups around the task forces. Thank you.
Did you get that, Mr. Mnguni?
Yes, I got that. Yeah, so basically, the review will look at a number of issues. We will, of course, in April, be having the second Sherpas meeting, which of course will be a virtual. At that meeting, we will present the framework for the review. So it is looking at a number of issues. The first issue is to look at the commitments, G20 commitments that were made over the years, which ones have been addressed, which ones have delivered, and which ones have not delivered, and why. Two, will also be looking at the question of the relationship between the two tracks, also the working methods, whether we need to be adding more working groups, what structure can best serve the G20, what structure can make the work of the G20 more efficient, of course, taking into consideration the informal nature of the G20. The question also of the rotation of presidencies. Do we have to, for example, have a situation where it takes the Global South more than 10 years, as was the case with South Africa and Brazil and others, to take the presidency of the G20, and thus indefinitely postponing the tabling of Global South priorities on the agenda of the G20. So those are some of the issues that the review will look at. But as I said, the framework will be presented in April when we have the second Sherpa meeting. And then question two on the relationship between engagement groups and, of course, the presidency or the Sherpa track. The standard practice, or at least since the Brazilian G20 presidency, is that when we have the third Sherpa meeting, which is usually in June or towards the end of June, that is an opportunity for the Sherpa to invite engagement groups to make submissions. For example, in this case, the T20, to make submissions on issues which they would want to be reflected in the leaders' declaration, and also allow for a more strategic discussion on the priorities of South Africa's presidency. So yes, over and above the ongoing interaction, of course, we do take into cognizance the autonomous nature of the engagement groups. But the third Sherpa meeting in June will then be that platform where the two structures will converge and have a strategic discussions in terms of what outcomes should be adopted come the Leaders Summit in Johannesburg in November later this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mnguni. We had already gone, past our allotted time, but we had to allow you to continue because you have a very limited time to spend with us. So you can share with us as much as you possibly can. Once again, thank you so very much for taking this time to be with us to discuss these very important issues. Much appreciated. And we look forward to discussing with you further the T20, G20 engagement. Look out for that communication, please. Next up will be the co-chairs. Thank you, Baba. There will be the co-chairs, very familiar with T20 and more importantly, the subject matter that we've just had. Fabio is well known. He played a very big role on the Global Alliance on food and against poverty in the Brazil presidency. And of course, we've got Zamiat as well. I understand that Dr. Mbele is not available to discuss with us. You've got exactly 15 minutes, colleagues. Fabio and Zamiat, please go for it.
Thank you, Mika. I am Zamiat Abubakar from Southern Voice, a network of 71 think tanks from the Global South, and with me is the other co-chair that's available today, Fabio Vera Suarez from the Institute of Applied Economic Research in Brazil. I will just begin with a brief overview of our task force. Sorry, 1 second. Yes. And for the absent co-chair is Sitembile Mbete from the Public Affairs Research Institute, Paris in South Africa. So this task force focuses on the solidarity for the achievement of the SDGs. And some of the particular SDGs in focus are the SDGs for hunger, poverty, inequalities, and gender inequality. And we are working to enhance the G20 Action Plan priorities and also possibly identify any needed additions. The work of this task force is focused on aligning with other important processes that are going on this year or that have just taken place. The Financing for Development Conference that's coming in June, for instance, or July, and the Path of the Future. And the theme of solidarity, I think with the SDGs, there's been a lot of talk, obviously because of the timeline and the lack of progress so far, about what comes next. And the issue of solidarity is very interesting because it's quite a unique time with all that's going on in the global north, international aid being cut from the US and now also the UK. And also the context of the last few years where we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, where international solidarity played a role in the face of crisis, and there was a need for it really showed the need to really reinforce that solidarity and cooperation across the global south and also global south and global north. So some key questions for us are what are the wins we can genuinely aim for within this G20 presidency, and what are the processes that we can kickstart during this presidency to sustain progress through next year and beyond, when we know that the presidency will be moving to the US next year. And I think I will go now to mention the sub-themes briefly. The sub-themes are accelerating SDG enablers and reducing negative spillovers. That's sub-theme 1. And that focuses on identifying and scaling up enablers for a more systemic approach to achieving the SDGs, and also mitigating any negative spillovers that may affect other countries, while certain countries are working on achieving the SDGs. And the second sub-theme is reducing inequalities, that is focusing on gender, and also SDG 16, peace, justice, and institutions. And the themes of equality, the care economy, development assistance, and the fiscal, social, and economic policies that can be put in place to work on reducing inequalities. And sub-theme 3 is food security through sustainable food systems. The work on that is also quite varied. Some focus on implementing the DEC and high-level principles, on also what can be done to help small-scale farmers or poorer countries in the global food value chain, the intersections with climate, international cooperation. So the work is all quite dynamic to really cover as much ground within the focus that we know that the South African presidency has in relation to the SDGs. I will hand over now to Fabio, who will talk a bit more about the abstracts that we have received in this stage, and the main ideas and emerging themes, some of the main ideas from all 3 sub-themes. Go ahead, Fabio.
Thank you, Zamiat. I first need to apologize to the researchers and to the people that have submitted the abstracts, because we are the ones of the task force that haven't finished the list of the approved ones. We are still in the process of reviewing the abstracts. We have received 145 abstracts. They are actually pretty balanced across the 3 sub-themes that Zamiat just spoke about: the discussion on the enablers, the discussion on reducing inequality, and the discussion on food security and food systems. To go directly to sub-theme 1, the main emerging themes were around the climate financing, the climate reform that includes aspects related to agriculture, water management, climate finance, and metric reforms, energy, and biodiversity. We also had discussions on human development, multilateralism, and international cooperation, as well as the use of digitalization as an enabler of the SDGs and developing financing. I did an exercise to look at the questions that we had in the concept notes and how different abstracts address or offer some hints on how the task force should respond to these questions. So if you recall, one of the first questions was actually on what are the critical enablers that the G20 should focus on for the SDGs, how these enablers could be scaled up, and what were the mechanisms that could be proposed by the G20 for integrated approach to reach the SDGs. So on that, of course, most of the abstracts concentrated on what we call the means of implementation. So we have abstracts discussing the issue of the financing, how a G20 could address the financing gap for developing countries to catch up with the SDGs. We had discussion on technology and specifically on digitalization that has been actually a quite strong themes within the G20 and the T20. But also we had discussions on how to foster good governance and multilateral cooperation to advance the SDGs. More specifically, in terms of the policy areas that could enable several SDGs together, we had a discussion, we have abstracts proposing discussion around health, around human capital development that also includes education and vocation and technical training. There are discussions that actually overlap with sub-theme 3 on sustainable food systems and the principles to transform agriculture and food systems, specifically supporting small-scale farmers. In terms of the integrated approach, there are ideas around enhancing policy coherence, developing new strategy, and improving institutional coordination and fostering public-private partnerships. When we look at how to avoid or contain negative international spillovers across the SDGs, there are discussions around how to promote policy coherence across the G20 countries, how address the root cause of instability in terms of the multilateral scene that we foresee, we are seeing. And here there are lots of discussion, of course, on the issue of trade protectionism and how to resolve the debt crisis that also overlap with themes within the task force and with other task forces. Passing now to sub-theme 2, that basically look at policies to reduce inequalities and different forms of inequalities. The first question was actually on what economic, fiscal, and social policies are necessary to promote equality and what progress are G20 countries making in that regard. We have here a very sizable number of abstracts discussing gender inequalities and how fighting gender inequalities can contribute to the SDGs, and discussing some of the policies that can be put in place. Here, the issue of childcare, of reduced tax rates for women to address wage gaps, wage subsidies, and also the increased participation of women in green jobs are discussed. The whole discussion around health and universal health coverage also shows up as an important aspect that needs to be strengthening in order to reduce inequalities. Progressive tax reforms that we just saw the discussion in the previous with the previous task force, and also accelerating and enabling social protection and microfinance through the resources that can be raised through domestic resource mobilization. There are also discussed specific on the care economy, so recognize the value of unpaid care work, amplify the voice of care workers, and recognizing the collective responsibility for care. On the question on if development assistance, that's a very hot question now, an investment in least developed countries to assist the fight against hunger, poverty, and inequality, we saw already abstracts looking at the importance of strengthening self-sufficiency and resilience of these economies so that they don't become sort of aid dependent. So a little bit of the idea, as we say in Brazil, of take the limes to do a lemonade now. But also they emphasize the importance of including the importance of ODA and technology transfer to reduce inequalities among countries. Going out to sub-theme 3, that's the one that I'm coordinated. Here we have a very clear question on how far is the implementation of Deccan high-level principles for transforming agriculture and food systems. That was actually principles that were assumed by the G20, approved by the G20 during the G20 in India. They have like 8 principles that the food system should be following with the support of the G20 and of the international organizations. And here actually we have several abstracts that do mention the Deccan principle and the relevance of following some of the principles that are there. We actually have one abstract that proposes to have a mechanism, an accountability mechanism to follow the progress around achieving the Deccan high-level principles and how they are being applied to the different into the different international cooperation that we see, including the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty that has been proposed by Brazil and approved by the G20, launched by the G20 in November last year. On the support for small-scale farmers and what's required to both food security and food sovereignty, based on sustainability principles. We have seen lots of mention and specific abstracts around agroecology and the importance of facilitating the adoption of agroecology by small-scale farmers. What are the policy incentives and that can be implemented by governments to improve access to markets and also to improve the capacity of small-scale farmers to adhere to agroecology. Also discussions around mobilizing finance here, both through domestic resource mobilization, but also through international cooperation and the role of MDBs in supporting smallholder farmers policies that are implemented by countries. Several papers also mention the adoption of climate smart agriculture, what are the nudges and the incentives that need to be in place, and the role of triangular cooperation. We also have a question on how can the participation of poorer countries in global food values chains be enhanced. We have some abstracts around fair trade agreements and the importance of reducing trade barriers for low-income countries. The importance of rolling back trade inhibitive policies, which now is something also a challenge in the world that we're facing now. And finally, the whole importance of strengthening collaboration and partnership. Here, I would like to highlight also that we have abstracts that also defend on the issue of food sovereignty, the importance of having localized value addition for some of the food consumed in the countries. Finally, on the factors that at the international level can enable greater food security, including affordability, we have again, of course, international multilateral with a focus on trilateral cooperation, the importance of knowledge exchange, technical support for countries and joint initiatives. Here we have, for example, mechanisms that have been developed under the G20 that actually should be monitored as well, such as technology facilitation mechanism, but also the expansion of the agricultural market information systems, AMIS, to improve market transparency. And that goes very much in line with one of the priorities of the Task Force for Food Security of the G20, that looks at the stabilization of food prices and improvement of market access. So I stop here. So basically, these are some of the ideas and how the different abstracts have tried to respond to the questions posed by the concept note of the task force. But I would like to say that we are quite constrained. So some of the abstracts will actually become blogs in the website because we can only select 25 of these 145 abstracts to actually be published by the T20. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Fabio and Zamir, for that fantastic work done. Clearly, we were on a roll. We'll have a quick discussion, open up to the panel to engage with you a little bit on this work. We have just a few minutes to do that, given the changed program slightly. For now, though, I do not see any raised hands. So let's see if we have 10 minutes to 12 actually to do this. Let's see if there are any questions in the. Okay, I see there's one from Camila Andrade. Camila, go for it.
No, it's Asanda Koyo. It's not me.
Oh, Asanda. Apologies, Camila. Asanda, go for it. I think you are still muted, Asanda. Okay, in the meantime, while Asanda sorts out the microphone, let's see what is in the Q&A. There's Anonymous here that says, thank you, Fabio, on the abstracts. What about cross-cutting enablers such as universal access to water and sanitation to food security? Is that coming through? That's the one question. And then another one, how will the G20 task force on food security explore the continent of Africa to improve impoverished countries on the African continent? The funding ends up in most of the presidents of these countries. Okay, I'm not sure what that means, but regulatory policies must be reviewed, and theoretical frameworks need to be reviewed and drafted needs to be done. Redrafts need to be done, revised and implemented. Can the G20 address these besides the AU? If you are able to respond to that one, please go for it. But it sounds more like a G20 question rather than a T20 question. But feel free to engage it if if you will. And then there's another one from Chantal Naidu. The deputy SG of the UN highlighted the principle of dignified livelihoods in her opening address at FIX. It would be useful to know how T20 G20 processes can incorporate such a principled approach, which can permeate all the working groups. Dignity as a basis of global response. That's another. And let's see in the chat function. And colleagues, please feel free, those that are working on this matter, other members of task forces, other experts, please respond to some of these. Please feel free to respond to some of these questions that may be coming up in the chat function. And then, of course, panelists, feel free to respond to questions in the Q&A. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. As a question, to Fabio, given that we are off track globally to meet many of the SDGs, is there any thinking in the abstracts or by G20 on what should be done about this? Accelerating progress towards the SDGs is the ideal, but what thinking, if any, is emerging on what to be beyond 2030? If maybe you can try these few questions in the 8 minutes that we've got, please, that would be great.
Okay, Zamiat, would you like to go first? Because I think that many of the questions are around the enablers. And also the one on water and sanitation. I'm just going to advance, yes, that there is at least one abstract on subtheme 1 that deals with this issue. But I think Zamiat, I think that most of the questions were for the enablers on SDGs, and I can complement it.
Yeah, and if we miss any, Michele. So regarding water and sanitation, we have seen in the abstracts some submissions related to that in different ways, also waste management, things related to that, and also things more closely related to the climate. And one of the interesting things about the subtheme 1, which is about enablers, is that a lot of the input that we're getting, also the engagement that we'll be having as the task force members and the co-chairs can apply to all the SDGs. And so we are getting also to the comment on livelihoods and dignified livelihoods. We might not get inputs specifically on that phrase, but we have gotten inputs on things like human development, education, use, jobs, care, and also things about reviewing the current indicators that we use to be more multidimensional, and that can really bring people out of poverty and address hunger. And then, sorry, am I missing another question, Nika? Not sure.
Well, there are several. All of them, well, some of them are really more G20 based. Yeah. On what G20 how G20 is addressing food security. Like how will the G20 task force on food security explore the continent of Africa, for instance?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can.
try.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, just to go to the question from Stephen, that's actually one of the colleagues of our task force. And thanks, Stephen, for doing the review. He did the review on time. So it's not his fault that we are delayed. But we have seen mostly among the international organizations since the realization that the SDGs are off track. And I think that a little bit of the language on the enablers that we have for the G20 and for the T20 for our task force is actually to try to prioritize some of the investments in some SDG areas that can have positive spillover effects on the others in order to try to fast track. So these are actually one of the ideas that are coming out, but I'm not 100% sure that the abstracts that we got are actually dialoguing with that possibility. Even though many of the G20 discussion, and for example, even the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty makes this argument. So they are prioritized SDG 1 and 2, but looking at the different spillover effects that it may have on other SDGs, like SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 8 on decent jobs, but also SDG 12 and 13. I remember from the summary of the abstracts also saying that some like responsible consumption and production as one of the abstracts that also would have several spillover effects. On the issue of on how food security is coming, and I saw one of the comments here that sort of complains about how the G20 official documents are coming about. And happy that some of the themes of the T20 are highlighting agroecology, the support for the smallholder farmers. So that's actually one of the functions of the T20 is to keep the memory of this discussion over time. But I do think that these issues are also relevant and being discussed in the order, not necessarily in the task force for food security, but in the agriculture working group of the G20. That's another one that our task force, specifically sub-theme 3, needs to dialogue with. So Zamiat, would you like to take some of this?
Yes, just one comment. Hope I'm not muted. No. Yes, just a comment on the question of beyond the SDGs. While this task force, the focus is the SDGs now, and accelerating or mitigating any negative issues that are coming out. I think a lot of the focus from the abstracts and also the task force in general will be on getting lessons that we can take beyond 2030. So things that can help us now, but also help us in the future. So while we're focusing on the SDGs in general and also focusing on specific SDGs that are priorities to the South African presidency, it's also, I think, a case of modeling helpful behaviors and establishing different ways of doing things. The task force is working together, more cooperation, things to do with funding that are coming out from the Financing for Development meetings about more cooperation rather than competition, solidarity. I think all these topics and lessons, and also the structure of the T20 this year with engaging more, the co-leads ourselves engaging more rather than focusing only on policy briefs and publications. I think all of this is to place us really in a good position going into the next presidency in the US, but also in general with the SDGs. When the conversations about beyond 2030 really develop more, these are things that we'll be able to pull. Thank you.
Another point that I just remember, it was this question on whether there would be also regional strategies. So just to highlight that in the task force for food security, it's quite explicit that there will be regional engagement besides the global engagement. And that's also reflect on some of the abstracts that we received specifically on food security that are looking at the regional mechanism and regional collaboration to ensure food security, but also to ensure price stabilization. So this is one of the one of the abstracts that actually has been accepted, that will be dialoguing very straightforward with the priority of the task force on food security.
Oh, fantastic stuff. Well, that's a wrap, for this session, and it comes just about 10 seconds ahead of schedule. So I think we've done fantastically well. Thank you both, Zamiat and Fabio. Thank you so very much for this work. Clearly, there's a lot of work to be done to find solutions for these major, global challenges. A lot of work, ahead of us, both, in the T20 and G20, and actually broadly, in our respective spaces. So thank you very much for this. We move swiftly next to the next session that will see us introducing Mr. Mangold to the group, presenting on the G20 SA Climate Action Goals. So this will be essentially our last session. So we hope to not keep you for too much longer in the day. We've hogged your time enough. But yeah. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Mangold, and your patience to stick with it, to this extent. Thank you so much. Please go for it.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Program Director. Greetings and good afternoon to all the people in this meeting. I see it's very well attended. I've been listening intently to some of the previous discussions and presentations, which have been very stimulating and thought-provoking. My name is, as was introduced, Stuart Mangold. I'm the Chief Policy Advisor for International Governance and Resource Mobilization at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, based here in Pretoria. And it's a real pleasure to be here today to discuss the G20 matters, particularly related to climate action. I thought what I could do is first of all take a small step back, Program Director and Chairperson, if that's in order, just to reflect on the issue note for the Environment, Climate and Sustainability Working Group that's been published together with the other issue notes for the other 15 working groups under the Sherpa track and other information, DIRCA website. That is a very important reference document for the entire program for the Environment, Climate, Sustainability Working Group, which is, of course, chaired by Minister Dr. Deon George, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment of South Africa. So in that issue note, you will see that there are actually 5 main priorities that South Africa has identified for the chairship of this working group. And the first one is biodiversity and conservation. And then the second one is land degradation, desertification, and drought. And then the third one is chemicals and waste management. And the fourth one is the one that I'm going to try and focus on a little bit more in today's deliberations, and that's on the climate change and air quality. And then the last one is on oceans and coasts. And then just in relation to the previous panel's discussion on the Sustainable Development Goals, the whole framing of this issue note and the main topics is in fact around advancing the environmental dimension, excuse me, of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. So that's the overall strategic thrust, if you like, of these 5 priorities. and we are very much aware that they all have interlinkages, and that there is a strong relation to all of these, both to the environment itself, socio-economic issues and inclusive growth, as well as the well-being of people and communities. So it's really framed in a sustainable development type of manner. So I just quickly would like to zoom in to what you have requested me to focus on in today's discussions. And our priority on climate change and air quality has a number of sub-priorities. So the first one is adaptation, climate resilient development, and also the issue of loss and damage. The second one is, second sub-priority is on climate finance and a just transition for all. And then also underneath that, or if you like, as a third priority, is the issue of are also very much aware that air quality in itself is a key issue, addressing both outdoor and indoor air pollution, but there are also co-benefits with climate change. So if I return back to focusing more on the climate change aspects, under the adaptation and climate resilient development, as well as loss and damage sub-priority, we're expecting that we would see how we could mobilize increased finance. We've had discussions today also in this meeting about broader finance and financial governance issues and the multilateral architecture around climate financing, and also around addressing information and knowledge gaps, particularly in the developing countries, such as issues around climate data, localized risk assessments, and effective systems for monitoring and evaluation for adaptation. Then also important for this particular sub-priority is the issue of institutional and governance challenges. So the coordination issues, as well as the to get a more coherent planning process in place for developing countries and Africa in particular around adaptation, because we are aligned, of course, as South Africa with the broader and part of the broader African the processes in terms of climate change, both at the AU level and under the UNFCCC. That adaptation is indeed a priority, and the importance of addressing loss and damage also needs to be brought to the fore in the G20 discussions on climate change. We then want, in this regard, to look at the enhanced resource mobilization, development of technical partnerships, and implementation of strategies to achieve adaptation and resilience, enhance collaboration in addressing loss and damage, and then the technical support, capacity building, and again, sharing of experiences and best practices is what we're proposing under that sub-priority. Then if we move on to the second sub-priority under climate change and air quality, and that's around climate finance and a just transition for all. Here we've, the point of reference is the enormous amounts of financing that's actually needed to deal with climate change globally. Some estimates between 2031 and 2050 predict we need at least $10 trillion with a significant increase from the flows of around 1.3 trillion that were reported globally for 2021 and 2022. Of course, a very small proportion of this reached the African continent, and this is, of course, also something which really needs to be addressed. Most of the growth in climate finance we found has been driven by clean energy investments in a few countries that receive 90% of the increase in these funds. So climate finance remains concentrated in developed economies and countries most affected by climate change receiving a disproportionately low amount. And, this, of course, you can see on the African continent and also in South Africa, to what extent we receive these climate finance flows, and in what form do we receive them? Are they loans? Are they concessional finance? Or what are they? How much of them are actually around grants? And how much of them are actually in form of some form of investment to stimulate the SMMEs and entrepreneurs around addressing climate change? So the mitigation finance flows we found primarily go to the energy and transport sectors, where private finance dominates, while agriculture and industry, which are also major emitters, receive much less funding. The emerging technologies are also important here around battery storage and hydrogen, and these are attracting some private investment, although they remain largely underfunded, particularly in South Africa. And also, just to put it in perspective, adaptation finance lags far behind, only receiving an estimated 63 billion allocation in 2021 and 2022, well short of the $212 billion needed annually by 2030 for developing countries. So an adaptation finance, I think this was emphasized earlier by one of the speakers, tends to be mostly around from the public sector, with very little private sector involvement. So it's about making the investment case for the private sector to invest more and more holistically and in a more scaled up fashion in adaptation. So we know, or we in our research, we found that we need to really address the gaps in this regard, and these include the reforms of the international finance institutions, which I think the previous panels have also discussed. How do we leverage concessional finance, and how do we improve private sector engagement and aligning financial systems with the climate goals, mainstreaming adaptation and resilience, and then this whole issue of phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. And addressing the improvement in data transparency and accessibility for climate finance tracking, and then also the exploration and development of climate finance models that are fit for purpose and appropriate to country-specific needs. In order to do this, we really need to look at what kind of finance can be mobilized for just transition, and we need to look at the complexities around the current challenges. And we need to also ensure that there's equitable access and shared responsibility among nations around climate finance more broadly. So you will recall that at the 29th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC COP29, as we more popularly know it as, which took place in Baku, Azerbaijan, in November last year, there was a significant decision on the new collect quantified goal on climate finance that was adopted, with the developed countries needing to take the lead to raise at least 300 billion a year for developing countries, by 2035. The NCQG also calls on the actors to work together, all actors, and to enable the scaling up of financing to developing countries for climate action from all sources, including public and private, to at least $1.3 trillion per year by 2035. and the support really should be focused towards implementation of programs in developing countries and supporting the climate response in these countries, including their nationally determined contributions, the national adaptation plans, as well as those other issues that are important for these developing countries as identified in other national plans and programs. And of course, in South Africa, we're fortunate to have the Climate Change Act, which was signed into law in July last year, which really provides a whole lot of options and aspects for our climate change response in a kind of a holistic fashion, addressing both the mitigation and the adaptation components, but particularly around also the capacity building, technology transfer, and how to scale up the means of implementation through the development of a financing mechanism. So that's a very important consideration for our own country, and the timing of the act being signed into law, which also gives the minister power to set sectoral emission targets for key sectors. It does a whole lot of other things around adaptation in terms of the national adaptation strategy and action plan, and various other components around the NDCs and the just transition. So we have in South Africa starting to put in place in a more coherent way with a more coherent policy approach to climate change through the Climate Change Act and through mainstreaming of climate change imperatives in other sectors, economic sectors, both in the public and the private sector. We also, as was talked about earlier, are concerned about the cost of capital, particularly when we start leveraging climate financing internationally, where these are loan or concession based, and we are very conscious, of course, in South Africa, along with the rest of the African continent, about the concerns around the high levels of debt and what the ceilings are and what does really allow us to borrow on the international market for financing of climate change programs in our country. So that is a concern, and we're very happy that the cost of capital review has been included in the agenda of the G20. Then we also have the issue of the natural assets and what their roles are in terms of contributing to the climate change response, whether it's in terms of mitigation through forests and vegetation and other carbon absorbing aspects of our economy, and what can the green economy do to also reduce our global, our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions nationally. So we are hoping out of our G20 engagements and also working closely with the Sustainable Finance Working Group, which is being coordinated by the National Treasury under the finance track of the G20, to really synchronize and synergize our programs on climate change, and particularly in the finance track around the mobilization of the finance that we need, but bearing in mind that the global environment is challenging in terms of that there are definitely opportunities that we'd like to explore within the G20 on how best to advance this issue of climate and climate finance, and generally speaking, raising the levels of engagement and ambition to deal with climate change and the support for developing countries and the African continent. Chairperson, I think perhaps maybe I should stop there. I know I've spoken a lot, but I thought let me give yourselves and the colleagues in this meeting just a broad overview of what we're hoping to achieve in the G20 regarding climate change. And please feel free to read more in the Environment, Climate, Sustainability Working Group issue note, which will give you further details on this. And just to note that we're having our first meeting, which will be virtual, from the 25th to the 28th of March, where we will present all these priorities that we've identified as South Africa in this Environment, Climate, Sustainability Working Group for further reflection and deliberation by the G20 members. And let me stop there. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mengold. Of course, we're not going to stop you from giving us as much as you possibly can under such tight deadlines. We much appreciate it. Thank you so very much for doing this. I see a question. There's a hand up from Mr. Amy Abdul Rahman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like to thank you for your excellent work you are doing. I am from Ireland, but originally from Africa. The importance of Africa's forest in absorbing greenhouse gas emission is well known. But what I would like to ask you is in relation to the developments in South Africa, what is being done, if you can share with us the experience of Johannesburg Stock Exchange market, how you are working on carbon credit market there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Did you get that, Mr. Mengold?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much.
Will you? Oh, there's another. I see a second hand from Ms. Penelope Herbst. Please go for it.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was the person that was kind of shadowing Chantel earlier and decided to try and log in by myself. Thanks, Stuart, very much for your intervention. I've just come back from the US attending the Climate Investment Fund meeting as an observer. One of your colleagues was there, Mr. Masayela Kekane. And I'd like to raise the matter of climate finance and the link back to the multilateral organizations which are treated as preferred creditors, and therefore any other finance that gets raised together with the multilateral finance seems to benefit from the halo effect of the multilateral climate finance structures. And this impacts on the debt sustainability because we're not really raising private finance, right? We're raising private finance with guarantees or some form of government support.
Okay.
How are we going to address this? Thank you.
Mr. Mengold, in the few hours that, well, the few minutes that you have left with us, please, if you can try to cover as much as you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for both those very good questions. The climate finance issues, as I said, they are being dealt with by the Sustainable Finance Working Group. So they are the experts in that. We at the DFFE, of course, also are involved from the climate change perspective, and we are trying to present a complementary type of approach from the policy perspective, together with the National Treasury on the finance, on the carbon budget, on the carbon taxes, on all those things. So we also are consulting with them regarding the carbon credit markets, and I think the point that was made around the engagements with the JSE, those are just beginning in South Africa, as far as I'm aware, and we will definitely look at how do we advance this issue of the carbon market in South Africa, because we feel that also would be a very useful way to promote the issue of climate finance more broadly. On the issue of the Climate Investment Fund meeting in the US, thank you for those reflections. Yes, our Deputy Director General, Mr. Maisela Kekana, who's the DDG for Climate Change and Inequality, was there presenting our proposal for the Accelerated Coal Transition Program to the Trust Fund, because we are hoping to mobilize a significant amount of highly concessional financing through this project to support the Just Transition program in South Africa. However, we are also very much aware of the debt sustainability issues. And I know our National Minister of Finance has a very tight kind of program in terms of what we can actually really do in terms of the debt issues and how much we borrow and if we do borrow, on what terms, and how long will it take to repay that debt, and what would the impact be in terms of our servicing costs of those debts. So these are all broader considerations that we need to take into account, and that's why we as South Africa have been saying that, look, if you want us to accelerate this just transition and to reduce greenhouse gases faster than we can at the moment, then we need the support essentially from particularly the developed countries, and not the support in terms of getting us further into debt, but this a real support in helping us to make that transition and to meet the targets and the things that we've agreed to in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. But not forgetting that we as South Africa place an equal priority both on mitigation as well as adaptation. And the just transition is a key vehicle for all of that. So let me stop there, Chairperson. I hope I've covered the issues adequately. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this, Mr. Mangold. I know that you had given us up to 3:15. So we're going for additional 2 minutes that family to spend with us. Thank you so very much for this presentation. We'll go to the task force co-chair, Mr. Gayla Montmaison-Claire, for Task Force 5 on accelerating climate action and the just energy transition, to respond and reflect on some of these issues and what is happening with the abstracts and so on. Mr. Mason-Claire, please go for it.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good day, everyone. It's a real pleasure to join you today to share a little bit more about what Task Force 5 is about and what we've been doing since we were constituted. As introduced, my name is Gayla Montmaison-Claire. I'm the director and co-founder of Southern Transition, Global South think tank, and I'm based in South Africa. It's okay, I'll share a couple of slides with you. Hopefully it helps everyone follow the direction. So Task Force 5, as briefly introduced, is really focused on accelerating climate action and the just energy transition. We have 4 key areas of work. The first one is on critical minerals value chain. The second one on adaptation finance. The third one on just energy transition. And the fourth one on biodiversity, climate, and development as a nexus. So as you can see, quite a spread of issues and topics, which are complementary in nature, but quite diverse in their understanding and framing. So In terms of the work on critical minerals value chain, we know this is a key priority of the South African presidency and of course of the African Union as a participant to the G20. Some of the guiding questions and issues that we're looking at are really around how we can enhance the implementation of the principles of the UN panel on critical energy transition minerals, how we can really enable increased value addition in countries, particularly through more equitable and inclusive supply chains and value chains from the perspective of supply countries, or at least on the continent, but more broadly in the global south, and not just, of course, reflecting the priorities and interests of the demand countries that are primarily in the global north. And of course, reflecting on what are some of the potential governance interventions that can be put forward to have a more sustainable development of mineral resources, not just when it comes to the mining stage, but really looking quite comprehensively at value chains in terms of beneficiation into manufacturing, services, and all associated activities. When it comes to adaptation finance, it is, as we know, a very different discussion and more complex discussion than we already having on the mitigation side of things, which itself is difficult. And so really, we need to put a lot more emphasis on understanding some of the key barriers to scaling up adaptation finance, and really making sure that that finance is of the right quantum and of the right quality, and ensure that it actually gets to the ground where it is really needed in countries that are most at risk, almost vulnerable already, such as low-lying islands, but also to communities on the ground that need that finance. And of course, here the G20 is a key vehicle to look at blending both public and private sector finance and look for innovative solutions that could really enable the scaling up of that finance, both again in quantity, but also, of course, in its quality. And yeah, I think we want to really be a force for new ideas, for new thinking around emerging models, innovative ways of solving the problems, and really play that role that the T20 was created for, to push for new ideas and new thinking. Third area of work of the task force is on just transitions, a very popular topic, as I'll reflect on when I talk about the abstract. And here, lots to already reflect on and learn from in terms of the existing developments around just transitions in country. A key area of work, of course, are the country platforms known as JETPs, and to what extent these have been successful or not. How could this be improved? How could this be resilient and sustainable? Of course, we all heard of the withdrawal of the United States from such platforms. And so how do we look at them going forward? Have they achieved what the beneficiary countries wanted or not? And how is this model going to evolve going forward? Is it even, a valuable model? And really, again, a key interest is in the volume, the quantity, but importantly, the quality of the support that is provided to countries, and how that reflects effectively the priorities, but also the needs and the context of beneficiary countries. The G20 provides a platform for learning, but also for clear guidance and putting forward some very strong direction in how this must be taken forward, possibly. Our fourth area is on the nexus, as indicated, of biodiversity, climate, and development. And here, really, what has guided the activities so far is looking at how can the G20 better champion the inclusion of nature-based solutions in the thinking, both in urban and rural context, and how can really the G20 be a vehicle for better alignment on some of the key initiatives that are unfolding both at national level, but also regional and international levels. Here, really, I think enhancing the goals and the outcomes and reflecting on the three Rio conventions for climate, for biodiversity, and for desertification is one of the key areas that certainly the task force is looking to engage with, particularly to address and, if not reverse, existing challenges when it comes to climate change, biodiversity loss, but also land degradation. The G20 is also a platform to enhance potentially the partnerships between public and private sector, and so this is one such area where the T20 task force is looking to make some valuable contributions in terms of, again, thinking of new models, new ways of thinking, and be a force of proposals for the G20 in that perspective. The task force itself is a fantastic group of thinkers and practitioners. It is led by Mayra Foley of Plataforma Cipo in Brazil, Céline Kaufmann from IDRI, the French Institute of Sustainable Development and International Relations, and myself. And then we've got a fantastic group, as I said, of co-leads from both the Global South and the Global North across our four sub-themes. We've tried to really balance, as you can see, as much as possible, representativity in those sub-themes, keeping in mind, of course, the interest of each member of the task force, and really kind of try to coalesce diversity of perspectives, but also expertise, interests, and geographies. We've received significant interest in the task force, I must say, especially when it comes to the sub-theme on just transition. As a task force, we received 181 abstracts, and half of that was on the just transition sub-theme, so quite an over-representation of a particular sub-theme, and then relatively equal, around 30 representation for the other three sub-themes. We had very strict guidance from the Secretariat, and obviously selected only a total of 25 abstracts for further developments. This has been completed, and successful authors should have been notified by now. And here I must really thank all the colleagues and members of the task force for the fantastic work that we've done under a very short time, and really appreciate the commitment to the process. We also, of course, as everyone else, looking potential blog post, as well as a potential more forward-looking declaration and statement around the key issues of the task force that could provide a bit of a preamble or forward for the work of the task force and of the communicators to come, but also a bit of overarching reflection on the state of our action when it comes to climate mitigation, adaptation, and just transition going forward. Some reflections so far based on the abstract that we have received and selected. What's coming very, very strongly is the idea of G20 as a consensus building and a platform for sharing ideas. really emphasizing in our selection the abstract that are looking to build on from previous presidencies, but also connecting with local context. And so that connection between, I would say, kind of local and global, but also micro and macro levels has been really a priority for us. And so has been really the work on practical solutions, again, linking various levels of action and interventions and knowledge. Because of the nature of the task force, we tried to link a lot the different issues, which, as I said, are somewhat disjointed, but of course complementary and connected, as well as those particular themes with the finance that is needed, both again in terms of quantity and quality, and focusing, of course, on solution. There's a vast diversity of ideas and approaches that are coming from the abstract, which I don't have time to go into, but some of the initial topics that we'll see some policy brief going forward. A big focus on South-South-North collaboration and cooperation opportunity, which we think is really fantastic, given the nature of the G20. Also, a lot of emphasis on benefit sharing models, particularly between countries, but also between stakeholders in rolling out particular solutions and models and mechanisms. Some really interesting and innovative work on climate insurance instruments, for instance, but also on rethinking the issue of climate vulnerability and what that means for finance and the kind of solutions that are coming. Of course, we could not avoid it. I think a bit of a critical review of the experience around the JETPs. We had quite a few abstracts around that, and so it will be reflected. And so is the very topical issue of green hydrogen and how that potentially fits into our transition, and particularly in terms of an inclusive angle of that. The role of low-cost financing and meaningful low-cost financing is also something that will be tackled, particularly from an adaptation perspective, but also in terms of biodiversity-related solutions. And then we will be looking at a range of potential ideas and solutions around natural capital valuation, nature-based solutions, also things like crop diversification in low-lying islands. And of course, many more topics and ideas that I have time to go through today. But of course, I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of what we have been involved in so far and what is to be expected in the coming weeks and months. And I will leave it at this with 9 seconds to spare. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for doing this with a few seconds to spare. We'll open it up a little bit for Q&As. See if there's anyone on the floor that has a question to pose, and have a little discussion for about 5 minutes or so, if that's okay with you. And before we welcome Elizabeth to come and wrap it up for us. I see there's a hand up. Is that Amy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, I'm Abdurrahman. I have just a question in relation to the sharing of the revenue from carbon credits. I mean, there are some instances where communities are not consulted, and there are some issues of big land enclosures, especially in vulnerable drought-stricken Horn of Africa, where the big media companies are trying to buy carbon credits. There are some confusions going on. If the speaker can comment on this, has he heard something like this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, there's a second hand. I think Renee, Dr. Renee Diouf. Go for it.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Dr. René Massiga Diouf. I'm the head of African Journalists Forum. we are an organization who intervene in more problematic now here in West Africa. In Francophone countries, we see that climate change is a real problem, but mobilized resource is also difficult now. I want to know if the G20, how G20 can do for that, for helping civil society in West Africa, particularly in Francophone countries, to have something to outgoing doing their job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see. I do not see any more hands. Okay, we'll go to the Q&A. We've got in the Q&A materials for presentation of the G20 SA Climate Action Goals. Please be shared with participants. Okay, we will look into that, Rabi Kasheli. Who is leading the cost of capital stream? That's the next question. If you'd like to perhaps respond to that. There's another. My second question from Siva Kumar says, my second question is about the increase in surface temperature, how it has been addressed in G20. We have initially expected 4 degrees increase in temperature, and now we have already reached more than 4 degrees rise. Is there any action on public awareness program and also about extreme climate change? Okay. Then there's this is why South Africa is limited to climate funding, or am I wrong? Okay, I'm not sure if this is in what this is in relation to. Maybe you said something that, yeah. If you can, relate, please go for it. Good afternoon, Stuart. No, this is not for you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think there's a lot of maybe comments, and some of them directed more at the G20, which I'm obviously not in a position to address. But from my end, yeah, I mean, of course, look, the issue around carbon credit is, and how to make it useful from an African perspective, particularly, is something that is on the agenda of the task force. And there's been quite a number of submissions around really understanding how we can make them work and really avoid a lot of the pitfalls, which we all know. We've all read the news. We've all seen how things can go terribly wrong with carbon credits and land grabbing and issues of exclusivity. And so, I think we certainly going to engage with that topic. On the issue of the current situation that we're dealing with, yes, so that is something that I've briefly mentioned, but we're looking to issue a particular statement as a task force, and I'm sure some of the other task force are looking to do that as well, to reflect a bit more on the status of where we are, over and beyond effectively just, of course, some of the technical topics that we're engaging with, but really a bit of a call to action when it comes to climate mitigation, adaptation, but also, of course, inclusive development and just transition. And so that's something that actually we are looking to do to have a bit more of, I guess, a bit more slightly proactive approach around this kind of issues. Issues of mobilization, this was quite specific, but I mean, of course, look, a lot of the work that the task force is looking at is to increase, as I mentioned, the quality and quantity of finance that's available. It's not geographically specific at this point, of course, in the work that we are doing. But that is obviously a topic that will be engaged and reflected on. When it comes to who submitted something on the cost of capital, I cannot tell you that because we did a blind review. And so actually I don't yet have access to who wrote the actual policy briefs. But as soon as I do, Femi, we can engage and that should become available very soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Much appreciated for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this essentially brings us to a close. But just before we do that, we'll invite Elizabeth Sideropoulos, the executive director of the Institute for South African Institute of International Affairs. Apologies, Elizabeth. Please wrap it up for us.
No problem. Mika, you've been working on this for 3 hours. You're entitled to be a little tired. Well done on very good management of the time and really good moderation. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, firstly, a very big thank you to all of you who have joined us over the course of the last 2 days. We've really had both in the Zoom meeting, but also on YouTube, really a very good response and a very good participation. And I think the Q&A question, the Q&A section of the Zoom, as well as the chat section of the Zoom, we've been trying to sort of keep tabs on it, I think has shown the tremendous amount of interest and also the the fact that when we talk about the T20 membership, which is an inclusive membership, as being really the ideas bank, it very much is. And I think your comments and your input and your questions have reflected that. What I just want to say in the form of a conclusion is perhaps just to highlight a couple of points that have come up repeatedly in the course of the last 2 days, and hopefully this will be useful. I think the first point to say is obviously there is the opportunity for a series of side events. I think colleagues have already posted in the Q&A that details about applying for a formal T20 side event will be going up shortly. There is also, I want to reiterate, remind everybody that at the end of April, we will be organizing an African high-level dialogue on T20, on G20 here in Pretoria. I think Sipamandla mentioned the date yesterday. I think it's the 29th and the 30th, if I'm not mistaken, of April. But information will be on the website. And then the next one is, of course, the midterm, which will be in June. Those dates are currently being finalized. Related to sort of the website, I would like to urge everybody who is not registered to go onto the website and to register. If you go onto the T20 South Africa, and please type in Think 20 so that it doesn't take you to the cricket initially, which it does. It happens to me. Is you'll see it scroll down on the home page, and at the bottom it will say subscribe to the newsletter. Please do subscribe to the newsletter. We can't add you for reasons related to data privacy laws here in South Africa. So please, you have to add yourself in order to receive notifications of all of these of developments, of events, and so on and so forth. And my colleague has just put it up on the has put it in the chat. The next point I just want to re-emphasize is that the abstracts have been received. They are being processed by the task forces depending on the volume. Some task forces haven't yet gone back to all authors. This is a little bit like the telephone call you get when you call Telkom or Eskom, and they say, due to high volumes, you have to wait a little bit because of the demand. You should be hearing. Those of you who haven't heard about whether your abstracts have been accepted or not, you should be hearing about it in the next few days. Just give us a little bit of time, give the task force chairs and the co-chairs and co-leads a little bit of time to process those. And as you saw, there is a huge number. We've taken a decision that we need to sort of manage the number of policy briefings, but create additional opportunities for people to actually put on paper ideas that they may have and so on. And so, as we said yesterday, there is the blogs, the opportunity to also submit blogs. And I think some of the colleagues in the various task forces have already identified some papers for blogs. The other thing that I want to mention, and again, my colleagues also spoke about it yesterday, is that we may also have the situation where we may request specific, from the task forces, specific inputs into the official process based on demand. As you've seen, we've had a fairly good engagement and interaction with the official process, and certainly if there is something that they specifically wish us to engage with them on, there will be that opportunity, and then we will reach out to the various task forces. And that's also the function of the advisory council in that regard. I think what is important to bear in mind is that, you know, everybody's talked about a really difficult or a very difficult geopolitical context in which this G20 is taking place. And we know that on some of these issues, it may be difficult to drive some of these processes forward in a significant way. But the role of the T20 is very much as an ideas bank. And the ideas, it's so important for the ideas to be on the table. Even if right now a particular idea may not be ripe for picking. And the opportunity that the T20 presents is really to get some of the ideas onto the table, whether it is through policy briefings or face-to-face engagements with the official tracks, or indeed through policy notes, or also side events. Lastly, and I have 6 seconds, I really want to thank the entire T20 Secretariat team. I think it's been an amazing team effort. Thank you all the guys who are behind the scenes as well, who we haven't seen today, but who've been making sure that everything runs smoothly. And just to say, we look forward to engaging with all of you over the course of the next several months, and certainly also to a very robust set of side events and discussions, because these are equally important in terms of beginning to shape some of the solutions. It's not just about the policy briefings, but I think very much about the policy engagement. So thank you all very much. And lastly, thank you to Mika for steering us today. And thank you to Duma for steering us yesterday. We had good drivers on both, or good anchors on both occasions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Cheers, colleagues.